Meet Yuka Takauka, a 21-year-old manager at Tokimeki Binbin, a girls' bar in Tokyo's disreputable red light district. She's popular among the clientele who visit for the attention of young women more so than the drinks. She's also a gamer, a cosplayer, and an anime fan. At the time these videos were shot, the world was unaware of the girl whose blood-soaked image would soon go viral, leading to her being known as the Too Beautiful Criminal. But to understand Yuka and what led to her crime, we first need to understand her work. Girls' bars are a common fixture in the urban areas of Japan. They're establishments that customers visit in order to drink in the company of attractive young women. Typically, the clientele are expected to buy their server drinks and tip well, while in return they receive flirty conversation. They're similar in concept to the better-known hostesses clubs, nightclubs in which men pay for women's time. Japanese culture places great emphasis on working tirelessly, often to the detriment of human connection, so for many, places like this fill an emotional void. Women face similar struggles, so there's an equivalent service targeting them too, host clubs. Visiting such a place is what set Yuka on the path towards a violent crime. In April of 2019, a host club named Fusion by Youth opened its doors. It was staffed by handsome young men, whose role it was to make clients feel special for a price. Among them was Phoenix Luna, a 20-year-old host who quickly established himself as one of the top earners. It wasn't long after the club opened that Yuka first entered Fusion and instantly took a shine to him. On April 25th, Phoenix proudly announced that she'd been placed third in the club's rankings for its first month. For Yuka, third wasn't good enough. He deserved to be first. With that, obsession deepened for the real-life yandere. So what is a yandere? In simpler words, it's a character archetype. At their core, it's an overwhelming level of affection, paradoxically paired with psychotic and frequently violent behavior. In manga, anime, and gaming, these characters are utilized for laughs and horror in equal measure, which is fitting given their inherent duality. Crucial to the characters are the motives for their unhinged actions, which through a twisted kind of logic tend to be done for the sake of their love interest, even when said love interests find themselves on the wrong end of the blade. Many of Yuka's actions after meeting Phoenix certainly follow that template, and the fact that she cosplayed as yanderes too meant the association was all but assured. Before long, she'd reserved Phoenix as a host indefinitely, and was spending most of her cash to push him higher up in the rankings. Yuka also began meeting the host outside the club, with his relationship to her rapidly morphing into a boyfriend for hire setup. To her, however, their conclusion was far deeper. She believed they were meant to be together, so she set her sights higher than pushing him to number one. Now she wanted to ensure that he'd never have to work again, so Yuka made changes to her employment and even worked nights solely to bankroll her efforts. The ultimate aim was that the pair would move in together. May 23rd, 2019 was the closest she'd come to realizing that fantasy. It was also the day she'd commit the crime that made her famous. That morning after work, Yuka purchased a kitchen knife at Don Quijote's store in Okobu. She later claimed that she bought the knife for household purposes and had no intention to commit violence. As things stood at that moment, her beloved was supposed to arrive at a 5th floor apartment on the east side at around noon. Once there, he'd help with cleaning. While it's often misreported that the two had moved in together by this point, it was just a visit. It's common for hosts to stay with clients from time to time, but on a permanent basis, Phoenix was actually living in a dormitory provided by Fusion. For him, the club was more than an employer. It had been his saving grace. Originally, Phoenix Luna had become estranged from his relatives, even when he was just a child, so he'd spent many of his younger years in an institution. He got a job in construction after completing junior high, but later left due to unspecified personal issues. As a result, his funds dwindled until there was nothing left, and for a time he was actually homeless. It was the host club that offered him stability, both in terms of income and a roof over his head. His co-workers there became a surrogate family, and by all accounts were as supportive as the term entails. It afforded him a level of income and attention he'd never had access to before, but not all attention is good attention though. And in regards to meeting Yuka's home, it seems that Phoenix had only started doing so a handful of days prior. The plan to meet at noon fell through, so he actually arrived at 3 PM, at which time he helped Yuka install a pair of curtains, then the pair talked for a while. According to Yuka, the first topic of discussion was a hair appointment he had scheduled, and the second was a conversation he'd had with his boss. The manager of the club had caught wind that the two were seeing each other outside of work, and he wasn't really pleased by this, as this gave a big spender less incentive to frequent the club, which really hints at the dark side of the business, which can be grueling, harsh, and lead both hosts and their clients to ruin. After their chat was over, they slept together, and then Phoenix would take a bath. Reportedly while he was bathing, Yuka had searched his phone and found either intimate photos of him with another woman or innocuous pictures of him serving a woman in the nightclub, which Yuka had taken as something more. Though we're still not sure exactly when it was written, a note later found on her phone captured her violent obsessive thoughts. "I want to be a tragic heroine. How is it possible for him to look at a woman other than me? I know that killing is for the best. If I kill, it will be eternal, and there will be no pain. I don't need anything other than you." Once he dried off, the host put on shorts and returned to the room, and this is what happened next in Yuka's own words. "After that, he fell asleep. I went to the kitchen and my desire to kill him and die remained the same, so I grabbed the knife and went to him. I held the knife in both hands and stabbed him in the stomach as he was sleeping. At this point, Phoenix woke up in a state of confusion. He tried to get up, so I got on top of him. He said, 'Okay, I love you, so let's stay together forever.' So I said, 'I love you too, so let's die together.' Moments later though, Yuka claimed she regretted the attack. I put the knife under the bed and said I won't tell the police, but I'll call an ambulance. So I took his mobile phone. When asked why she discarded the knife, Yuka replied, 'When I stabbed him in the stomach and saw the pain on his face, I felt really regretful, and at that point I no longer had any intention of killing him.' Given what followed, this is debatable. Whether or not Yuka was planning to continue the attack, Phoenix wasn't sticking around to find out. He got up and went to the front door, so I chased after him, telling him not to go. He hit me, punching and kicking me in my arms, legs and face. Luna's attempts to escape would inadvertently lead to the images that would soon become iconic to a select crowd. That's when my contacts came out, so when I get to my glasses, I also took my cigarettes and cell phone and chased after him. In the meantime, Phoenix, bleeding heavily, made his way to the elevator. He took it down to the ground floor, but blacked out shortly after disembarking. Yuka took the stairs and found the host unconscious in a pool of blood. She sat down beside him and made a call. A passerby took these pictures on their cell phone before calling the police. They quickly found their way online, and this kicked off a social media frenzy. Suddenly, Yuka had fans who declared with varying levels of sincerity that she was too cute to pay for her actions. In response, there formed a crowd who were disgusted by the glorification of the gruesome crime. The former posted fan art, edits, left fawning comments on Yuka's social media, and one even concocted a story that Yuka had been writing love notes in her victim's blood. The latter disavowed their choices and questioned their sanity. Something about the image of Yuka appearing to chat casually on the phone while covered in blood seemed to resonate with a certain crowd, though later in court, she'd claim her being on the phone wasn't as callous as it appeared. I don't know why I'd picked them up, but I found myself holding a cigarette. I found Luna lying in the entrance. I was so regretful that I called the police. When I saw Luna's blood and how he looked in pain, I really regretted it and realized that I had done something terrible. I didn't want him to die, and I was scared of him dying, so I called. With that said, this differed from the story that she had originally given to authorities at the time, as she told them, "I did not want to go anywhere, so I sat down outside the staircase. I did not call emergency services because I intended to die after watching him die from the stabbing. Since I loved him so much, I just couldn't help it. After killing him, I too wanted to die." Soon after her arrest, Yuka told the police that she'd already known that she wouldn't be able to die with Phoenix before she'd reached the ground floor, because she had heard a woman scream while making her way downstairs. When questioned about this contradiction, Yuka blamed her state of panic at the time, claiming that she'd gone along with whatever the police and prosecutors said. In any case, when Yuka was taken into custody, cameras caught her smiling in the back of a police car. This too found its way onto Japanese news networks and social media. But what of the man left bleeding in the lobby? Outside of his identity as the victim, Phoenix Luna was treated as a bit of an afterthought. Many at the time assumed he'd died from his wounds, and some still do. Fortunately, he actually did survive, though it was a very close call. Phoenix, having lost a great deal of blood, remained unconscious for 5 days before finally waking up. While in the hospital, his co-workers at the club came to see him. Before Phoenix was discharged, his doctor had to deliver some bad news. The blade had damaged his liver, so there would be no alcohol until it healed. "If you can't drink, we will on your behalf," one of his fellow hosts assured him. But a surprising silver lining to this whole ordeal was that while Phoenix was in medical care, the police attempted to contact his blood relatives, and they were successful. "I met my older brother and sister for the first time in years. I'll be very happy to stay in touch with them in the future," he told the press. On July 1st, 2019, he returned to working at Fusion by Youth. And after the ordeal, not only was Phoenix Luna forgiving of Yuka, but in some ways he was grateful. "I do not hold a grudge. I think there was a reason for her to stab me. It was also thanks to her that I was able to achieve the sales that I did in less than a year since I became a host." It was a tongue-in-cheek statement, and that's not the only evidence that he took the whole thing in stride. His statement of forgiveness was sincere, as demonstrated by a request he made before Yuka's fate was sealed. He asked that the judge be lenient with her. During the trial, Yuka then sent an apology letter to her former fixation, and had her legal team reach out directly to offer financial compensation. The sum was around 5 million yen, equivalent to around $33,000. When all was said and done, Yuka was convicted for attempted murder and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, and was released sometime during 2023. As of now, Yuka is active on social media, hosts live streams, creates YouTube videos, and recently even held an in-person event. Even today, she remains a highly divisive figure. Running a business means juggling countless tasks, projects, deadlines, and budgets, and team collaboration. Keeping this all organized can feel so overwhelming, but that's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one management software designed to simplify every aspect of your business. From invoicing and accounting to project management and website creation, Odoo has a solution for everything. And here's the best part, your first application is free for life, including unlimited hosting and support. So let's talk about the Odoo project application, which is an absolute game changer for project management. It gives you an efficient and comprehensive view of your projects, helping you stay organized and in control. With its customizable dashboard, you can choose the view that works best for you. Kanban view. Visualize tasks as sticky notes. Drag and drop them between stages to keep your pipeline flowing smoothly. Gantt view. See tasks on a timeline, track dependencies, and stay on top of deadlines. List view. Access all your project data at once and perform batch actions effortlessly. For productivity, create tasks and subtasks, recurring ones or dependencies. Schedule activities like calls and meetings and never miss a beat. Plus, collaboration has never been easier, as Odoo centralizes emails, notes, and files all into one place, ensuring everyone stays connected. So if you're an entrepreneur or you want to start running your own business, Odoo will save you so much time and money in the future, which is why I personally use it myself. So try Odoo for free today, and simplify your work and focus on growing your business. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description to get started. In the case of Yuka Tauka, her similarity to Yandere wasn't treated as a cause for her actions. She was a non-verbal child who appears to have developed attachment issues as she aged, which manifested as severe anxiety surrounding the possibility of rejection and abandonment. While that is certainly an oversimplification, the point is that anime itself wasn't blamed for what happened, but this will become progressively less true from here on. For now, we remain in Japan for a lesser-known case. This time, we're in Kyotanabe. In the early hours of September 18th, 2007, a teenage girl buried a hatchet into the neck of a sleeping police officer. As she hacked away with the intent to remove his head, she was dressed like this. The event would indirectly spawn a meme and reinvigorate the ever-present debate surrounding the influence of media on the mind. So how did this minor come to be both willing and able to murder a police officer? Well, let's jump back a week or so to September 13th and work our way forward from there. The 13th was the day that a girl unnamed due to being just 16 at the time of her crime found herself browsing the tools in a hardware store. To keep this simple, we'll refer to her as X from here on. X opted for what has been referred to as both an axe, a hatchet, and a knife depending on the source. This seems to be because the weapon she utilized straddles classifications. It's known as a nater, likely a Tamari nater in particular. The choice went on to impact the reaction to the crime, though it was made at least in part for pragmatic reasons. Her target was a grown man, so she needed something that could shift the odds in her favor. X hid the hatchet in the bedroom she shared with her older sister, and waited for the perfect moment to use it. This was one of several factors which demonstrated that this girl had contemplated killing for some time. X later explained that she wanted to commit the murder before she turned 17, and had imagined a guillotine bringing about the officer's end. Now you might be wondering what this man had done to deserve such a calculated wrath. Well, in addition to being a sergeant for the Kyoto Police's traffic department, the victim was also X's father. While we know nothing of his performance as a cop, as a parent and a husband he was a failure, if X is to be believed. Several reports indicated that X, and potentially her older sister too, had suffered from their father's abuse when they were just children. Coverage is always light on details when the age of an offender is so low, but what hints there were lead us to believe that it was physical violence they were subjected to. In more recent times, X has come to resent her dad for being controlling to an extent that she found humiliating. Having her desire to go to art school gatekept by whether or not her father approved is one example of such. But what seems to have angered her the most, however, was the disrespect shown to her mother. Quote, "I hated my father's relationships with women. I wish he would disappear from this world," X explained after the killing. Her mum is said to have been aware of her husband's extramarital affairs, but doesn't seem to have ever addressed the situation. "I can't forgive the act that the whole family was unhappy with my father, but they pretended to be calm." The girl expressed a great deal of care for her mother, the two were very close. All things considered, her core motive appears to be a longing to do what her family couldn't, bring an end to their mistreatment. At midnight on September 18th, X's sister went to bed. She was 19 at the time and unaware of the blade hidden in the room. She did note the absence of her sibling, though this wasn't any cause for alarm. X, having not slept since the night before, waited until the early hours, then changed out of her pajamas and into a gothic Lolita outfit. For the uninitiated, Lolita gets its name from a novel about a grown man obsessed with a child called Lolita. Jeffrey Epstein's private jet, the Lolita Express, was a reference to the same book, which probably tells you all you need to know. In Japanese fashion, the term refers to a particular style heavily inspired by Victorian-era clothing. It's popular in Japan, but it's not an obvious choice of attire when there's murder in mind, so it's an unusual attention-grabbing detail. Armed and dressed, she entered her father's room at around 4 AM, stood alongside him, and then repeatedly swung the hatch down into his exposed throat. So effective was the method that investigators went on to find no defensive wounds, or even any signs of struggle on the victim. Reports didn't mention the mother's whereabouts at the time of the attack, although it stated that after killing her father, X went to wake up her mother and sister. Given what we already know about her parents' relationship, it's plausible that she would have been sleeping in a different room. But what makes the circumstances extra curious though is that X's mum didn't contact the police until 4:40 AM. When she did call the authorities, she told them her husband had used a blade to cut his own throat. When police arrived at the home, they quickly learned that wasn't the case. The officers found the murder weapon in the kitchen, and the youngest daughter in the living room wearing bloodstained clothes. "I cut him with the hatchet," she told them without any hesitation. Whether her mother had genuinely believed her husband's wounds were self-inflicted, or that she'd lied hoping to spare her daughter the consequences, there's really no way of knowing. Either way, having given herself up, X was arrested and the case became public in no time. As the numbers of reports grew, so too did the amount of personal information about the offender. While her identity was never leaked, it became public that X struggled with depression and allegedly displayed obsessive traits. These elements were reported far less than her outfit. It was also broadcast that X wanted to become a manga artist, while also being a fan of horror movies, and had supposedly said she likes to watch blood. While it wasn't deemed worthy of much airtime, it should be noted that besides her issues with her father, X appeared to have no personal problems or prior transgressions. Nevertheless, her interest briefly became a hot topic due to the unusual nature of the case. It was a perfect storm comprised of a young killer, her choice to wear a style popular amongst the youth and in anime, and an interest in manga, where teen killers are a semi-regular inclusion. As a result of the attack, several TV networks cancelled upcoming broadcasts of anime that depicted violent young girls, including the finale of School Days, which featured the use of a similar tool in one of its grisly murders. What was shown in this place baffled the audience.
Turn it up.
There's no dialogue, it's music!
It won't just be music, I promise.
And 10 minutes of music it was, complementing scenic images of Europe. A 4chan user reacting to the situation posted a screenshot, dryly stating that the first episode of School Days was live action. Then this unspectacular part of the footage led to an even drier follow-up. Nice Boat. There's no way to predict that this will catch on online, and Nice Boat is a perfect example of this. Though this originated on an English board, it spread furthest in Japan, where it became a way to refer to anything bizarre or obscene without actually stating what that thing is. The creator of School Days themselves, an artist named Overflow, even got in on the joke. The media and bloggers went about retreading old ground regarding whether or not the kind of violent anime being displayed had played a part in the attack. While there certainly wasn't X's motivation for the crime, an incident a couple days later in which a boy injured a parent did lend undue validity to the public concerns. The boy had also used a nator in his attack, and admitted that he'd been inspired having seen news about the Kayu Tanebe incident on TV. Regardless, method and motive are two different things, and the debate soon died off as it always does, up until the next bizarre event revives it again. Following her arrest, X made an apology to her father. This was reported as tearful in some outlets, and devoid of emotion in others. In the end, the Kyoto family court determined that protective measures were the best approach, and so they sent X to a secondary juvenile school, as they believed that the focus should be on rehabilitation and reform. They reached this decision in part due to her family indicating they had no desire to punish her for her crime, which may hint at how hard they'd actually taken the loss. Central America isn't the first place that comes to mind when it comes to Japanese media, but the region has its fair share of fanatics. Among them was 15-year-old Taylor Aronis, a resident of Costa Rica who became the punchline in a dark joke when his attachment to fiction culminated in fatal consequences. It was Soryo Toshinomo that Taylor felt unassailably drawn to, or to give it its English title, Heaven's Lost Property. Both an anime and a manga, Heaven's Lost Property follows a teenager, Tomoki, who has been dreaming of an angel since childhood and learns that these dreams means he's connected to another world. This world and the angel lloyds within it are basically heaven and its angels with a sci-fi twist. The story is about Tomoki, among others, learning about this new world while the audience gets a heaping dose of fan service. Taylor discovered the anime in 2016 and was only a fan of it for a few months before he did something unthinkable. It was one character in particular who became the center of his world, an angeloid named Ikiros. Soon after meeting, Tomoki becomes permanently linked to the collar of this undressed celestial being, at which point the team becomes the angel's master. Now, viewers of anime will likely be familiar with this flavor of wish fulfillment. For those who aren't, don't worry about it. All that really matters is that these two are stuck together. As his time watching the show went on, it became increasingly intertwined with Taylor's identity. Taylor's parents noticed changes in his behavior as his fascination developed. As soon as we went to school, he was strange, he withdrew, he was aggressive. He didn't want me to hug him. He didn't want anything, just to ask for money. It wasn't the Taylor who was affectionate, he felt lonely. His mother told Diario Extra. Both parents stated that Taylor was spending everything he had on merchandise, including t-shirts, pins, and figures of Ikiros. It's not unheard of for fans to overspend on their favorite properties, but in this case, it seems to have been an attempt to stave off an ongoing descent into despair. He lost his internal battle on August 16th, 2016. My wife got up at 5 AM, knocked on Taylor's door and he didn't answer. I looked through the window and saw him suspended with the chain. I went in and when I took him down, he was purple. Taylor's father Jesus told the press. He put a metal chain around his neck and tied it to the purling. He didn't hang there, he was very tall. He didn't make an effort to grab anything. The condition in which he was found suggests that the teenager had given himself the option to change his mind, but had chosen not to. He'd left a note to explain his decision. We have a letter in which he says he wanted to die for the love of the girl. He was enchanted by Ikiros. He asked God to forgive him, to take him to be with the girl, and if not, he would be with her at the gates of hell. It's true that the note Taylor had left possessed his love of Ikiros. Among other things he'd written, I love Ikiros, and it hurts knowing that you're not there and I cry. Sometimes I cry without stopping. Taylor's parents blamed the anime for their son's death, believing that the method he'd chosen aimed to emulate the connection between the protagonist and his love. His girlfriend was that demon disguised as a drawing. She wrapped him up and he became obsessed. When I read the letter, it shocked me. He was in love, the doll tormented him, he didn't sleep, his mother said. His father added, I burned everything, shirt, cassette, pins, and posters. He was in 7th grade, he didn't study. The money we gave him to eat, he spent on that cartoon. Taylor's parents went public as they wanted to get anime either censored or just banned entirely. As a result, what happened to Taylor found its way to anime fandoms. Consider this a spoiler warning for Heaven's Lost Property, because the internet's retelling of Taylor's story requires that we spoil the plot. The TLDR online is that teenager ends his life following the death of his anime waifu. They are of course referring to Ikiros, who died in the movie Sora no Otoshimono Final, Eternal My Master. Clearly this would be a massive overreaction to the death of a fictional character, so it led to its fair share of really dark jokes. This wasn't helped by the fact that the name Ikiros was a giveaway from the start, and the connection to the god of myth is ever clearer apparent when you see her final scene in the anime. The film is where the screen adaptation of Heaven's Lost Property ended, but the ultimate punchline came courtesy of the manga in which the author famously brought all of the series' dead heroes back to life, Ikiros included. Following this revival, there was a few light-hearted extra chapters where everything was back to normal, and it was made clear things will remain so forever. So the discourse online became the sardonic parroting of should have read the manga. And that is funny in a bleak way, but it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. As mentioned earlier, Taylor had discovered Heaven's Lost Property in 2016. Chapter 77 of the manga in which Ikiros is revived was published in March of 2014, and the much maligned movie released in April of that same year. It was clear that he was obsessed, so it seems unlikely that he'd have been completely unaware of the true ending, especially when it was accepted as the superior version for over 2 years by the time Taylor had discovered the show. When reading his final message, the ultimate fate of his favorite character doesn't come up. What does is the fact that Ikiros does not and will never exist at all. Taylor's parents, who appear to have sought a scapegoat, couldn't see the wood for the trees. As soon as he went to school, he was strange, he withdrew, he was aggressive, he didn't want me to hug him, he didn't want anything, just to ask for money. It wasn't the Taylor who was affectionate, he felt lonely. Now with greater context, what his mother said here suggests that the problem was much bigger than a show he watched. He was lonely and he felt even more so at school. In his note, Taylor left little room for doubt. Is it worth being born if you can't be with the person you love most? If she became real, I would be happy. In life, the character appears to be in a retreat from his struggles at a time when he needed something outside of himself to live for. If she became real, I would be happy. I will only work for her and study only for her. While immersed in the fiction, Taylor seemed to find a part of himself that he desperately wanted to show. I want this to be real and one day to tell her marry me, Ikiros, and I will show her how good humans are. In death, the fantasy was escaped for one last time. In reality, it seems humans aren't so good after all. We returned to Japan one final time for our last topic, the consequences of which were unspeakably tragic for the victims and devastating to the art form the man responsible claimed to hold dear. This is the story of Kyoto Animation arson attack. Of everything we've covered today, the destruction of KyoAni is the one you're most likely to have heard of. The crime became global news due to the staggering number of lives lost and the wealth of talent and passion that died with them. It was July of 2019 that was the darkest period of the studio's history, a history that stretches back as far as the early 80s. As for the events that caused it, the events which led him to kill began 2 decades after the studio came to be. Meet Shinji Aoba, a mass murderer in the making. Seen here on Kyoto streets, he's laying the foundations for the violence to come. Aoba was of course a huge fan of anime, but a lover of KyoAni's creations above all. He was so fixated on the studio that he was long determined to find a way to be a part of it. His attempts began in 2005 when he entered his novel into a contest the studio was holding. The prize? The work chosen would receive an animated adaptation. To win it would have been a dream come true, but unfortunately for him, his book wasn't selected. For the others who had the same outcome, that was the end of it. But for Shinji Aoba, his obsession with Kyoto animation was just beginning. How large a role his failed attempt played in his future behaviour, there's really no telling. But what is apparent is that the negative aspects of Aoba's character worsened following his rejection. In 2006, he was convicted of theft and had resorted to moving in with his mother, as he couldn't seem to hold down a job. But living at home suited him just about as well as employment, so after 6 months in the home, he left again. Unfortunately for him, his mother continued to support him financially even after his departure. Generally, the more you learn about the man, the less capable he seems. Aoba undoubtedly had underlying mental health concerns which clearly impacted his ability to function in society. His issues may have been caused and were no doubt worsened by his abusive father, who mistreated him and his siblings. To an extent, he was aware of his problems, as proven by his decision to attend a psychiatric clinic and to accept in-home care. It would be a visit from a nurse in May of 2006 that resulted in the first calling warning that violence would be a result of his gradual decline. As with any routine visit, the nurse had knocked on his door, but this time he answered with a knife in hand. He immediately grabbed her. "You are persistent, stop following me. If you don't stop, I'll kill you." Luckily, the nurse managed to de-escalate the situation and convinced him to hand over the blade. This was one of the first signs that his grip on reality was definitely slipping, and when he began refusing care in March the following year, he had ensured that from then on there'd be no professional help to ground him. Years later, in June of 2012, he then robbed a convenience store. Following the robbery, he had no further contact with his mother, which severed his last line of support. Having remained off the radar for several years, on July 16, 2019, cameras near Kyoto Animation Studio captured the footage you saw earlier. This was the beginning of the end, the result of a love that had long since turned to hatred. In the past, he'd researched how to get a job at the studio, but the book competition seemed to have been the closest he ever got. He'd continue watching the studio's works following his rejection, but this only served to strengthen his anger because as he watched, he noticed something. There were elements in their stories which bore a striking resemblance to scenes in his discarded novel. Aoba was caught on CCTV again a day later, pushing a cart and still wearing the same clothes. His preparations complete, it was on the morning of July 18, 2019, that he would finally enact his vengeance for the theft of his work. It began in sudden chaos at 10:30 AM, when he ran into the lobby of the KyoAni building with a can of gasoline. Reportedly, he doused both people and the property with fuel while yelling "die", then quickly used a lighter to ignite it. The lobby, the nearby staff, and the perpetrator were instantly engulfed in flames. 74 employees were inside the property when the fire began, most of them on the upper floors. The blaze spread so fiercely that the floors filled with smoke in just 30 seconds. With little time to act, several jumped from windows on the second and third floor, suffering injuries from the impact but surviving the leap, but others didn't get the same chance. One employee who managed to escape left the scene to get help, then upon his return found the severely burned arsonist lying on the ground nearby. The emergency services arrived soon after, and the battle to contain the blaze began. Meanwhile, officers approached him, still lying on the road. "Are you going to arrest me?" he asked, and as he was taken in, he mumbled something to an officer about his novel. Shinji Aoba was rushed to the hospital to receive emergency care while firefighters worked to limit the destruction caused by his crime. It took them 4 hours to bring the fire under control, and until 6:20 AM the next day to extinguish it entirely. What they found in the aftermath was truly horrific, as described here by CNN. After dousing the flames, firefighters entered the building and found 20 bodies lying on the staircase leading to the roof exit. Another team found 11 bodies on the second floor of the building, and 2 on the ground floor. All in all, 33 people lost their lives that day, and many more were injured. They'd all contributed to KyoAni's highly regarded productions, many of them for decades. Among their ranks were artists who'd worked elsewhere in the industry on animations such as Akira, Grave of the Fireflies, Pokemon, and countless others beloved in Japan and beyond. And they deserve far more attention than we're able to give them today. In a turn that was undeserved, doctors were actually able to save the life of Shinji, though it took extensive treatment and multiple surgeries to get him to the point where he was fit to stand trial. And then it took 4 more years for the proceedings to begin. And on January 26, 2024, 143 days after the trial began, Shinji was wheeled into the courthouse to receive his verdict. He'd never denied his actions, so the true purpose of the trial was to determine whether his mental health issues were severe enough to diminish his criminal responsibility. Of particular importance was a delusional disorder which experts from both sides agreed was legitimate, though they disagreed on whether or not it inhibited his ability to recognize the illegality of his crime and the harm it was likely to cause. Due to several factors, the court determined that yes, he was cognizant enough to be aware of his actions, and for committing mass murder, he was sentenced to death. As for the supposed plagiarism, here is every example he gave when asked to specify exactly what had actually been stolen from him. The price of his theft was 33 lives.